My name is Elena. I'm 32 years old, and 3 weeks ago, I was folding laundry in the bedroom when my mother-in-law called me, crying so hard I could barely understand her. She kept saying his name over and over. Marcus, Marcus. Then finally, between sobs, she managed to get the words out. Elena, Marcus is in the hospital. He collapsed at the airport. They don't know if he's going to make it. I remember setting down the shirt I was holding very slowly, because my husband Marcus was standing in our kitchen downstairs, making coffee. I had heard the machine running not 5 minutes before she called. But before I tell you what I found out, please subscribe to Heartway Stories and tell me what country you're watching from in the comments. Because what happened to me over the next 3 weeks changed everything I thought I knew about my own life. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. Marcus and I had been married for 4 years. We met in graduate school, both studying architecture, both too stubborn to admit we liked each other for almost a full semester. He proposed on a Tuesday, which he always said was his favorite day of the week because nobody expects anything good to happen on a Tuesday. That was Marcus. He found beauty in ordinary things. He was the kind of man who remembered which mug was your favorite and always made sure it was clean when you woke up. He traveled often for work. His firm had projects in Seattle, in Denver, sometimes overseas. So it wasn't unusual for him to be gone for 10 or 12 days at a stretch. When he came home, we had a quiet ritual. Long dinner, wine, no phones. We caught up slowly, like people filling a cup drop by drop instead of all at once. It was one of the things I loved most about our marriage. Even after 4 years, coming home to each other still felt like something worth looking forward to. The week before my mother-in-law called, Marcus had just returned from a 2-week trip to Portland. A large commercial project, he said, delayed by weather and permitting issues. He came home on a Thursday evening, looking tired but relaxed, kissed me in the doorway the way he always did, left hand on my jaw, and said he was grateful to be back. Nothing felt different. Nothing felt wrong. So, when she called, when his mother's voice came through the phone shaking and broken, telling me her son was unconscious in a hospital 3 states away, I did something I'm still a little ashamed of. I laughed. Not cruelly, just the short, confused laugh of someone whose brain refuses to process something impossible. That can't be right, I told her. He's here. He's downstairs right now. She went quiet for a second. Then she said, Elena, I'm looking at him. I'm standing in the hospital, and I am looking at my son. I walked to the top of the stairs. I could still hear the coffee maker. I called his name. He answered immediately. Yeah? You okay? His voice floated up, warm and familiar. I told my mother-in-law I would call her back. I hung up before she could say anything else. I went downstairs. He was standing at the counter in a gray t-shirt, pouring coffee into the blue mug he always used, the one with the small chip on the handle from when I dropped it moving apartments. He looked at me and frowned slightly. You look pale. What happened? I told him his mother had called, that she said he was in a hospital in Portland. His expression shifted into something careful, concerned but measured. He set the mug down and said hospitals mix up contact information all the time, that it had to be some kind of administrative error, that maybe someone had used his name by accident. He was calm, logical. He even offered to call her back himself to clear it up. You've been stressed lately, he said gently. Let me handle it. Looking back now, the calmness should have been the first sign. Because if someone told me my husband was in a hospital I didn't know about, calm would be the last thing I'd feel. He made the call in the other room. I heard his voice, low and steady, when he came back. He said he had spoken to a nurse who confirmed it was a case of mistaken records. Wrong next of kin information attached to another patient. His mother must have been shown the wrong file. He put his arm around me and said everything was fine. But everything was not fine. Because when I texted my mother-in-law that night to check on her, she didn't respond the way someone would respond if they'd just been told it was a mistake. She sent back 2 words, be careful. I didn't sleep well that night. I lay there in the dark listening to him breathe beside me and kept telling myself I was being irrational. I had seen him. I had touched him. He knew things only Marcus would know. The name of the coffee shop where we had our first date. The reason I kept a specific photograph on my desk. the way I needed the ceiling fan on even in winter. There was no logical explanation for any of what his mother had said. So I pushed it down and told myself to let it go. The next few days were ordinary on the surface. We worked from home, cooked dinner together, watched shows we'd been meaning to get to. But I started noticing small things. Not alarming exactly, just slightly off. The way a picture on a wall is crooked by half an inch, and you can't stop looking at it even when you're not sure why. He paused a half second too long before answering certain questions. Not unusual ones. Simple ones. What time did you wake up? Did you call your friend back? Do you remember where we put the extra keys? Small pauses that I kept telling myself meant nothing. He also stopped doing one thing I had never noticed he always did until he stopped doing it. Every morning, Marcus would check the weather on his phone before he even got out of bed. He'd read it out loud even when I wasn't listening. 62 and cloudy today. Like a small daily announcement to no one in particular, the man in my house stopped doing that. He checked his phone, but silently. I told myself I was looking for problems because I was scared. That grief and stress were making me paranoid. I didn't tell anyone how I felt because I was embarrassed by the thought forming quietly in the back of my mind. Then my mother-in-law called again. It was a Sunday afternoon. He had stepped out to get groceries. She spoke quickly, like someone who had been waiting for a window. "I need you to listen to me, and I need you to stay calm," she said. "Marcus is alive. He's been in and out of consciousness. He had some kind of episode at the airport. They think it was induced. Elena, someone did something to him." Her voice dropped. "And I think whoever that is knows where you are." The floor seemed to tilt under me. I sat down on the kitchen floor because my legs stopped working. I asked her what she meant by induced. She said the doctors had found something in his system, something that had been building up slowly, not a one-time exposure. Long-term, as though someone had been administering it over time in small amounts. She told me not to confront anyone, to act normal, to come to Portland as soon as I could manage it without raising suspicion. She said she had been afraid to say more on the phone. She was afraid of who might be listening. I sat on that kitchen floor for a long time after she hung up. When I heard the car in the driveway, I stood up, went to the sink, and splashed cold water on my face. By the time he walked in carrying paper bags, I was at the counter pretending to read something on my laptop. "Got that pasta you like?" he said, holding up the bag. I smiled and said thank you. That night, I lay awake running through everything I knew. My real husband was unconscious in a hospital in Portland, poisoned slowly over what must have been months. The man sleeping beside me looked exactly like him. Knew things about our life that would take extraordinary preparation to learn, and had, at some point, taken his place so seamlessly that I had not noticed for days. I thought about who Marcus was close to. His work colleagues, his friends, his family. And then a name surfaced that I had kept at the back of my mind and hadn't let myself look at directly. Ryan. Ryan had come into our lives about 18 months ago. He reached out to Marcus through a genealogy website, one of those DNA matching services Marcus had signed up for on a whim years before. The test came back showing a half-sibling match. Same father, different mothers. Marcus had never known his biological father well, and Ryan claimed he hadn't either. At first, Marcus was cautious. But Ryan was easy to like. Warm, funny, attentive. He visited twice. He and Marcus looked similar enough that people commented on it, though they weren't identical. Similar build, similar coloring, same way of tilting their head when they were thinking. I had liked Ryan. I had been glad Marcus had found someone from his biological family. I had cooked for him, shown him around our neighborhood, shared things about our life with a stranger I had decided to trust because my husband trusted him. Now I lay in the dark and thought about how much a person could learn about someone in 18 months if they were paying close attention. How a voice could be studied, how mannerisms could be copied, how a person's entire life, their routines, their memories, their relationships could be cataloged and absorbed by someone patient enough and motivated enough to do it. I thought about Ryan's second visit. How he had asked to see Marcus's office. How he had asked detailed questions about Marcus's work trips, his schedule, his colleagues. I had thought nothing of it then. I thought he was just curious about the brother he was getting to know. Now every innocent memory had a different shape. And then I thought about something else. About the coffee. Marcus always made his coffee too strong, dark enough to stand a spoon in, and he always complained that I made mine weak. The man in my house made coffee that tasted like mine. I had noticed it and thought nothing of it. I had even thought maybe the trip had changed his taste. People adjust. People change small habits. I thought about the ceiling fan. Marcus always turned it off when he came to bed because even though I needed it on, the noise eventually bothered him, and we'd had a whole negotiation about it years ago that ended in a timer. The man in my house turned it off too, but not at the timer. He turned it off when he thought I was asleep. Like he knew the rule, but not the reason for it. The next morning, I made a decision. I was going to act perfectly normal, and I was going to find out everything I could. I started quietly and carefully. When he was in the shower, I went through the bag he'd brought from Portland. I had told myself Marcus always packed a specific way. Shoes in a separate compartment, chargers in a front pocket. A book he was always in the middle of somewhere in the main section. The bag was packed differently. Efficiently, but differently. I took a photo of the bag's contents with my phone and sent it to my mother-in-law with one word, him. She called me that night when he was watching television. I took the call in the bathroom with the faucet running. She confirmed that the real Marcus had been found collapsed in a parking structure at Portland International Airport. At International Airport, a traveler had called 911. He had no identification on him. His wallet, his phone, and his watch were gone. It had taken the hospital 2 days to identify him through fingerprints. By the time they reached his mother, someone else was already living in his house. Ryan had taken his place. Not through surgery this time, not through any dramatic physical transformation. He had simply used what nature had already given him. He and Marcus were similar enough. And Ryan had spent a year and a half studying every detail of Marcus's life with the precision of someone preparing for a role they intended to play indefinitely. I asked her what she thought he wanted. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said she had found something while going through Marcus's home office files while she was in Portland. Marcus had inherited a significant property from his biological father, one he hadn't even fully processed yet. A commercial building in a city where property values had tripled in the last decade. The legal transfer of ownership required a spouse's signature. It was worth more than everything else we owned combined. Ryan hadn't come into our lives looking for family. He had come looking for what was at the end of a paper trail, and he had decided the most efficient way to get to it was to become the man whose name was on the deed. I sat on the bathroom floor with the faucet still running and let myself feel everything for exactly 5 minutes. The fear, the violation, the grief of realizing I had cooked meals for this man and called him by my husband's name and let him hold me while I slept, believing he was the person I loved. I let myself feel all of it. Then I washed my face, turned off the faucet, and walked back out to the living room and sat down next to him on the couch and asked if the show was good. He said it was okay. He put his arm around me. I leaned into it and stared at the screen and made a plan. I could not go to the police yet. My mother-in-law had spoken to a lawyer friend who warned that without airtight documentation, a man claiming to be Marcus could create enormous legal confusion, especially if he had already started building a paper trail of his own. I needed proof that was impossible to dispute. I needed to move carefully and quickly, and I needed him to believe I suspected nothing. For the next 9 days, I was the best actress I have ever been in my life. I cooked. I laughed. I made plans with him for a vacation we were never going to take. I asked about his work. I listened to his answers and stored every inconsistency. He knew the broad strokes of Marcus's projects, but not the fine details. He knew the names of Marcus's colleagues, but occasionally paused on the ones Marcus had mentioned less frequently. He knew the layout of our house perfectly, but once, just once, reached for a light switch that had been in a different position in our previous apartment. Not our current one. Meanwhile, I was building a file. I worked through an old laptop he didn't know about, one I kept in a box in the back of my studio closet under a pile of old-school projects. I was in contact with my mother-in-law daily. I was in contact with Marcus's doctor, who was carefully managing his recovery and keeping his progress out of the official hospital directory at my request. I contacted a private attorney of my own. I gathered documentation, the genealogy website records showing Ryan's original contact with Marcus, The dates of his 2 visits cross-referenced with the timeline of Marcus's strange symptoms beginning. The flight records showing Ryan arriving in our city 4 days before my husband supposedly came home from Portland. I requested security footage from the parking structure where Marcus had been found. Through the attorney, through proper channels, slowly. It came back showing a man in a gray jacket, helping a visibly unsteady Marcus into a car. The man's face was obscured, but the jacket matched one Ryan had worn during his second visit. I had a photo of him in it from a dinner we'd had. I found the genealogy website profile Ryan had used to contact Marcus. It had been created 6 weeks before the first message was sent. Not years of being on the platform, not a casual user who stumbled across a match. 6 weeks. A profile built specifically to make contact. I found financial records suggesting Ryan had been in significant debt, the kind that comes from bad investments and worse decisions, for nearly 3 years. Right around the time he would have discovered, through some means I still don't fully know, that his half-brother was about to inherit a commercial property worth millions. 9 days. I gathered everything I could gather. Then the attorney told me the moment was coming. Ryan had been pushing for a meeting with a property lawyer, using Marcus's name, using our address, using credentials I had not known he was cultivating. He had scheduled it for the following Friday. He intended to initiate the transfer process. I let him think I didn't know. I even helped him pick out what to wear that morning, suggested the charcoal blazer because I said it made him look professional. He smiled and thanked me and said he would be back by 3. I told him I would have dinner started. I drove separately. I arrived 15 minutes before him. The attorney was already there. 2 officers from the financial crimes unit were positioned in the hallway. My mother-in-law had flown in the night before and was sitting in a chair in the corner of the conference room, and when Ryan walked in and saw her, I watched the expression on his face go through 3 different versions of itself in about 2 seconds. Surprise, confusion, and then something that looked almost like calculation, as if he was still trying to find a way to manage the situation. He looked at me. I looked back at him steadily. I said, "I want to show you something before anyone picks up a pen." The screen on the wall came on. The parking structure footage. His flight records. The genealogy profile timestamps. The medical reports from Marcus's toxicology screening. The photographs. The financial documents. Everything I had spent 9 days gathering while making him dinner and laughing at his jokes and pretending to sleep while he turned off the ceiling fan. He stood very still while it played. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he tried. He said the footage was unclear. He said the timestamps were coincidental. He said there was another explanation. He kept talking, and the room kept being silent around him, and the officers stepped forward. And I watched him understand that there was no version of this he was going to be able to talk his way out of. He looked at me one more time before they let him out. I don't know what he was looking for. I had nothing to give him. The charges were serious. Aggravated assault, criminal impersonation, attempted fraud, unlawful imprisonment, and administering a substance without consent, which carries its own weight in court. His attorney tried several approaches over the following months. None of them held. The evidence was too clean. The timeline was too complete. He is currently serving a sentence that will keep him away for a very long time, and the property he tried to steal remains exactly where it belongs. The first time I walked into the hospital room where Marcus was recovering, he was sitting up, reading something on a tablet. He looked thin. He looked tired. He had a bruise along his jaw that was fading to yellow at the edges. When he saw me in the doorway, he put the tablet down, and for a second neither of us said anything because there was too much to say and no good place to start. I crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed and took his hand, the one with the small scar on the knuckle from a project he'd been working on the year we met. I knew that scar. I had always known that scar. And sitting there holding his hand, I realized that some part of me had known all along, not from logic, not from evidence, but from the quiet, persistent feeling that something essential was missing. The feeling I had kept talking myself out of because it seemed impossible. Love is not just memory. It is not just shared history or inside jokes or knowing someone's coffee order. It is something that lives underneath all of that. Something that knows when it's not being met by the right person even when every surface detail says otherwise. I had felt the absence of it for weeks and kept telling myself I was imagining things. I was not imagining things. Marcus came home 6 weeks later. The first thing he did was check the weather on his phone and read it out loud to no one in particular. 58 and sunny. I stood in the kitchen doorway and listened to it and felt something unlock in my chest that I hadn't realized was still closed. We are doing the work now, both of us, of putting something back together that was broken in ways neither of us chose. It is slow and it is not always easy, and some days are harder than others. But he is here. He is real. And I know the difference now, in a way I cannot fully explain but will never again doubt. If you are in a situation where something feels wrong and everyone around you is telling you it's fine, please listen to yourself. Not to paranoia, not to fear, but to that quiet, persistent, inconvenient feeling that refuses to go away no matter how many reasonable explanations you offer it. That feeling exists for a reason. And if you're going through something difficult right now, I want to hear about it. Leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Subscribe to Heartways Stories if this meant something to you. And I will see you in the next one.